we have a really interesting, I hope, talk for you this morning, which is the second part of the AI in Education Law seminar series. And some of you, I can see names that were at my first seminar, which covered like an overview of the language of AI and how we're starting to see it being used in education. In this seminar, I'm joined by the wonderful Faizul Azman, who has just yesterday been ranked as a rising star in IP law in the Legal 500 yesterday in the London Bar. And so I'm delighted to have him here to be able to share his expertise about the existing legal frameworks and regulation of AI. And he's going to bring out information about the international framework, what the regulators are up to, what Europe is up to, and how this is likely to be affecting education providers going forward. And then I'm going to have a look at what the government is doing by way of frameworks and how this is then feeding its way into education. And then I'm going to look too at the benefits of AI in education that we're seeing at the moment. In my first seminar, I signaled that there are various areas of risk, safeguarding, there's concern certainly in the AI world. This seminar is a lot more positive, a lot more looking at what we've got here already, what we can use and draw upon from other jurisdictions, and what the kind of exciting, innovative parts of AI. And then we can come to the risks and pitfalls and things that maybe people are worrying about. But I want to give you confidence as practitioners in education law, or perhaps in broader areas, or in education more broadly, to now understand AI so you can use it in your day-to-day practice. I can see that there are some questions already that have been in the chat. We are really happy to take questions, so just type those in the Q&A box and we'll try and answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. My colleague Delphine has put in information about our profile, so if you want to email us directly after the seminar to ask us any questions, that's absolutely fine. We're both really interested in this topic, so please feel free to do that. This seminar is being recorded. The first seminar was also recorded, and we'll send out our slides following this seminar too. I think that's everything for now, so I'm going to pass over to you, Faizul, and leave you with the existing legal frameworks. Go ahead.
Great, thanks Alice, and thanks for the introduction there. And good morning all who's joining us. There's the agenda that's put forward for today, and I'm really going to be looking at the kind of legal frameworks and regulations and case on the role of regulators and how the law really fits in. So it's pretty much black and white from me, and then Alice will hopefully fill in the gaps a bit later on how it relates to education. Right, so what's happening in the UK? Well, there's no specific law on AI. And as will become apparent during this webinar and Alice's next webinar, the question really is whether one is actually needed in the future. So given that there's no specific law on AI, well, what's the UK doing? Okay, so the UK has adopted this pro-innovation framework to AI. So the framework underpins the principles of safety, security, robustness, appropriate transparency and explainability, fairness, accountability and governance, and contestability and redress. They're just words for you at the moment, and I'll go into how that'll be applied a bit later. But this framework of what I've just said is distributed, or has been distributed across existing sector-specific regulators, which are deemed to be better placed to implement the framework and the existing law on the use and application of AI within their own specific domain. The one thing I'll say is that the framework has no statutory footing, but it's all guidance at the moment. And the role of the regulators really here will lead the implementation of the framework, for example, by issuing guidance on best practices on how to adhere to that framework. But the one thing we have to remember is that this isn't solely down to the regulators. The UK approach, this pro-innovative approach, really relies on the collaboration between the governments, regulators and business and people who actually are going to be using AI. So it's all a collaboration. But what we're looking at really for the next 12 months or so is an ongoing analysis of how the framework really sits within the UK currently. And I think it's my understanding that regulators will publish some sort of analysis mid-2025 about what they've found since implementing this framework. Well, I've mentioned that this hasn't been put in statute, but this doesn't actually mean that no law exists relating to AI. So the position is that current UK law and the courts either address or are starting to address some of these emerging risks by AI. And because of that, there's no need at the moment to create a standalone AI Act. So, for example, if AI provides a discriminatory outcome, well, that might contravene the Equality Act. You've got data protection laws that provide a framework on how AI should process data. You've got consumer rights laws, which can protect consumers where they've entered into contracts for or include AI-based services. And what I'm looking at there would be independent schools or universities. Alice touched on this in a first webinar about tort law and how that can provide redress where a civil wrong has caused harm through AI. And I think this is something that might come up, that Alice might bring up a little bit later on, but AI therapists, for example, and if that's going to be used in an education setting. And obviously, being an IP lawyer, IP law protects the rights of rights holders, and so that also falls within that scope. I mean, there's plenty of other areas of law that I'm not an expert of, which will or may actually include AI, but we'll see them emerging in the future. But the one thing I'd say is keep in mind that the UK AI framework regulates the use of AI and not the technology itself. So just bear that in mind. And outside of any AI legislation, for those who like to read a lot of case law, there's currently a lack of judicial decisions or case precedents that specifically address the issue of AI. I mean, historically, we've had a case in a tax tribunal where AI is being used and it's made up case law. I think in the US, that's been quite prevalent. And we've also had cases relating to intellectual property rights. So, for example, there was a case recently that went to the Supreme Court, the Davis case, and that was asking the question on whether an AI machine could be named as an inventor in 2 patent applications. And the answer to that was no. So we can see really this kind of emergence of AI and how it kind of fits into different areas of law. And it's not just the UK that's seeing this. I mean, we've seen a lot of cases around the world. I think mainly the US and around especially copyright infringements. And that's mainly when these AI models are being trained up on works that belong to other people. So at the moment, there's a stack of cases in the US where they're suing the AI developers and saying, well, actually, you've used my work as part of your training data set, and therefore it's copyright infringement. So the more that time progresses in that space, I think that will give us an indication of where this is really going. I think the reality is the indication that there's not much case law on it in the UK isn't anything to say that there's anything wrong with it. I think it's just the simple fact that the courts haven't had that opportunity to grapple with those key questions relating to AI and the legal implications around it. But as I said, this is more of a time frame that'll go on. I think if people start understanding that you can use other areas of law to bring claims that relate to AI, you'll see things start to come through a bit more, I think. But what I will say is, much like the rise of the internet and legal issues relating to it, common law will also likely evolve, and that will accommodate the use of AI in different sectors. Again, that's something that will just take time. So I've given you the framework and a bit of a background into the UK's approach. And I guess the question you probably want to ask is, how does this work in reality? So I mentioned before that regulators in specific domains are best placed to interpret and apply this principles-based framework to AI. And actually, I hope they don't mind, but I've got a good example for the education space, and that's Ofsted's policy paper, which was published back in April on their approach to AI, which is consistent with the national AI strategy. In that paper, it sets out in table 2, which is what I want to look at, is what they expect from providers in relation to use of AI, which forms part of their wider inspection and regulatory processes, but in this case, assessing AI's impact on children and learners. And in that table, it does give a very broad outline of things that you can be thinking about. So, for example, providers are expected to assure themselves that AI solutions are secure and safe for users and protect users' data. And now from there, you can see how current data protection, the Equality Act, human rights, consumer rights law may interplay with this expectation. The next one is about being transparent about the use of AI and making sure they understand the suggestions it makes. Again, similar UK law can apply. Only use AI solutions that are ethically appropriate. Again, we're looking at the Equality Act and how that applies there, the Human Rights Act. And actually, there may be some issues around national security, depending on what's actually being delivered by that AI program. And the next two about staff, excuse me, having clear roles and responsibilities in relation to monitoring, evaluating, maintaining, and the use of AI. We're now bringing in areas of employment law and possible professional negligence, data protection, and all those remits. And the last one they put down is staff are empowered to correct and overrule AI suggestions. And now this is really what we're talking about, which is the safety and use of AI in the education space. The decision should be made by the user of the AI and not the technology. So you've got these principles, which is the expectation, but this last one really is the fail-safe. It is down to the human rather than the machine. Sorry, I had a question that's come up. No, it's on the same slide. So, given that guidance from Ofsted, and I'd urge you for those on the webinar to go and have a look at it just to get your head around it. I think you can really see the expectation required, especially at the early stages, and what you can do to implement this framework. But looking ahead, we've got this framework that we are kind of adhering to. Those specifically using AI in the UK and not in the EU or internationally, I'll go on to that next. We'll just need to see how this evolves, particularly as AI is just rapidly developing across the board. But this is something that's really being talked about in the UK. First of all, excuse me, there's discussions in the House of Lords, and back in May, they're talking about the implementation of an actual regulation around AI. And during that debate in May, I mean, there seems to be a consensus about the need for some form of AI regulation, but the form and extent of it would require further debate. But again, this is more about time. And I think using that time for the regulators to understand and implement the framework will then hopefully decide whether we do need an actual statute in place. But what I will say is the UK is really committed at the moment to AI and innovation. I know Alice will touch upon this a bit later, but the UK is really pushing for this, and it's going to host a conference on frontier of AI safety in November in San Francisco. And that's to talk with AI developers that can put into practice some of the commitments they had made at the AI Seoul Summit. Again, Alice will go into that a little bit later. Just moving on, so I'm just going to park the UK side of things at the moment, because this is where it gets a little bit tricky. And I understand that some education providers may have campus branches in the UK, as well as countries in the EU and further afield, maybe in the US or in the Far East, or even in the Middle East. So the EU AI Act, this is a summary of it. I mean, I can't go into too much detail because this will just be an entire day of talking about the EU Act. But what I will say is that this is the first comprehensive law to regulate AI, which came into force on the 1st of October, sorry, the 1st of August this year. And that was during the summer period, so it might have flown under the radar for most people. But the obligations within that act really comes into effect between 2025 and 2030. And just by way of background to the Act itself, it's intended to foster the development and uptake of safe and trustworthy AI systems. And what it really does is supplements the existing EU laws. So, for example, you've got the EU GDPR rules, and so it just supplements that in terms of the AI space. So you may have seen the Act itself, but briefly, this introduces a risk-based approach. And so what it does, it classifies AI systems into 4 main categories based on the potential risk posed to users and society in the main. So those 4 are unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. So when I'm talking about an acceptable risk, these are AI systems which are deemed to be a threat to safety, fundamental rights, or democratic values, and they are banned. You've got the high risk. So these are AI systems that significantly impact people's lives, such as personal data, education, employment, intellectual property rights. And these systems are subject to strict requirements and oversight. Then we've got the limited risk. So these are AI systems with low impact, such as chatbots, which require transparency obligations, basically informing users that they're interacting with the AI. And then you've got minimal risk. So these are AI systems with little to no risk, such as spam filters, which are largely just unregulated. And so that's really what I want to say about the Act itself. But I want to just really explore why it's tricky. Because at the forefront of your mind, you think, well, if I've got a campus branch in say Poland, for example, well, how does that work? Well, actually, the EU Act has this, as in the AI Act, has territorial scope under Article 2 of that. And in summary, it basically provides that any organization wishing to sell, distribute, or deploy AI systems within the EU, they must comply with this act. So it basically covers all actors involved in the AI supply chain impacting the EU market, regardless of where they are in the world. And this is the sort of scary bit, because if you get it wrong, the penalty is quite severe. So depending on the breach and the severity, it can range from 7.5 million euros or 1% of its worldwide annual turnover for supplying incorrect or incomplete or misleading information to the authorities. And right up to the top end, it could be 35 million euros or 7% of worldwide annual turnover for the more serious breaches. And I think commercially, you have to have that in mind. But we've basically just talked about 2 different frameworks here. We've got the one in the UK, which is non-statutory, and now we've got this EU AI Act. And obviously, we're not part of the EU anymore. But on a commercial sort of sense, I think those operating in the EU market, companies, whether it's a university or other education providers, I think they'll end up imposing a more global baseline anyway for compliance with the EU AI Act. And that's just to avoid a barrier to trade in the EU market. And you can see, if you fast forward, how if you're having to comply with these strict rules within the EU, you then have this sort of Brussels effect. And by default, companies who want to operate within that market will be complying with that. And then that will trickle down to different countries. So if you're looking at being compliant with the AI Act, you're likely going to be compliant with the sort of framework that's in the UK. So there are two different approaches. One's strict, one is less strict. But there will be, I think, a trickle-down effect in the future about being compliant with one strict model. I do want to touch very quickly on the international sides. If I can just, here we go. I don't want to labour too much time on this, but again, it's just to put it out there. And I'm going to just touch upon the US and Canada regime. So in the US, there's a blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, which is set of 5 principles and associated practices to help design, use, and deploy automated systems. And the principles itself is very similar to the UK. So we're looking at safety, discrimination protections, data privacy, notice and explanation, and human alternatives, a consideration and a fallback. But the US isn't one of those countries that apply to it. So the US has a state level legislation. So where the state or certain cities are empowered to legislate on a wide range of matters, some of these states, some of these cities are actually starting to do this with AI. But what they'll do is they'll follow the blueprint. Given the amount that's out there, I'm not going to go through them all, but just simply to highlight that education providers with campus branches in the US will not only have to deal with the UK framework and possibly the EU framework, but also state legislation around AI if they have a campus in the US or whichever state that is. I'm going to briefly touch upon Canada. Canada has no regulatory framework in Canada. It's not specific to AI, but what they are doing is they're proposing the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which has regulatory requirements. But again, this is underpinned by similar principles to the UK and the EU. And hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight as to almost like different tiers across the world on how different countries are applying it. But I think the underlying principle is they're all on the same sort of page in terms around safety, rights, data privacy, and having these kind of like fail safes in the background. I'm happy to take questions after Alice, and I'm going to now pass you on to Alice.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I'm going to just move on to, you would have seen a sneaky preview of this, but on how the government is looking at AI at the moment, because I think this is going to be particularly useful as an overarching set of principles that we might start seeing in schools. Some schools may be using already. I saw an article in the Times Education Supplement which used some of these principles already. So I thought it would be useful for practitioners to see what the on a government civil servant level is being used at the moment and how it's applied. So there is a generative AI framework now for His Majesty's government, and this is available online. I'll put a link to it in the chat. Faizul already covered how there are these general principles about data protection, safeguarding, making sure that you keep things secure generally. But this, and in some ways, there are a number of different types of principles and different pockets of government that we're seeing. But to me, this I think is starting to draw together some overarching principles that we'll see used across governments and used perhaps more broadly in the sectors that we work in. The previous government was into AI as well, so they set up Sunak's government set up the Office for Artificial Intelligence, as far as I'm aware, and now this is part of the AI Policy Directorate within the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So you can see that it's being positioned as part of this government drive towards innovation and tech. And this guidance, which is available online, is all about guiding how the public sector will use AI technology. So it aims to ensure responsibility, efficient use of AI whilst protecting public trust and national security. You can imagine these sorts of principles are going to be incredibly important in the public sector, but also will be applicable to working with children and working with vulnerable adults. And this framework sets out principles and guidelines that cover a wide range of AI applications. So things like safeguarding, transparency, ethical considerations, and legal compliance. Key aspects of it include safety and robustness. So these are the 10 principles: safety and robustness. So ensuring the systems are safe, reliable, secure, making sure that you've thought about mechanisms to mitigate risks like bias and inaccuracies. Talking generally about ethical use, so ensuring it aligns with the sort of the values of the civil service, individual rights, fairness, transparency, maintaining public trust. We've also got the aspect of transparency and accountability, so making sure that we've got human control at the right stage, principle 4. So just going back, you'll see that there's a poster on the right hand side which talks about that key principle of having humans at the heart at the right stage of going through using generative AI. So if you're using ChatGPT or something, you have to have human control at the right stages to make sure you've got a trained and qualified person to review the outputs, testing the tools before they go live as a human, checking them regularly, periodically, and then also feeding in feedback from actual humans and users, and then updating whatever it is that you're doing. So there's these posters that have been generated by the government, are pretty useful. You can imagine them being adapted within NHS, within schools and universities, and as well. So we have this idea about human oversight being available and being part of the stages of AI. We also have, as Faizul has touched upon, the importance of data privacy, data protection laws, individual privacy. And then interestingly, there's this idea about collaboration. So principle 7, about being open and collaborative and working with your commercial colleagues from the start, which I thought was quite an interesting feature of these list of principles. But effectively, it's again coming back to this idea of innovation. So encouraging partnerships between government, academia, industry to foster innovation, using the best tools, and to ensure that AI tools will serve the public interest. And so these principles are meant to ensure that the use of AI, including generative models like ChatGPT, DALL-E, that sort of thing, are remaining innovative, responsible, but also maintaining public confidence and being in line with those government digital initiatives. And what I think is interesting about these principles is we can see how these may be used really quite sensibly and transferable across to the education sector. So teaching young people about what AI is really important in my view. Teaching them how to use to work out what its limitations are. So teaching them about hallucinations, the fact that it can get it wrong, it can create things that are untrue, that are that you need to double check your work. We can also see that this principles are imbue the ideas of using it ethically, using it lawfully and responsibly. We have this idea about making sure that it's used securely, not putting personal data into the machine unless it's completely safe to do so. Making sure that you're putting in human control at the right stages. And you can imagine how you can develop an AI curriculum in school. You can also imagine how you might use this perhaps to inform a university policy. So to make sure that you have guidance, for example, on using, if you needed it, to how to use AI for essay writing and what the limits of it should or ought to be. Because I think some universities, some schools are not preparing themselves enough for this, and you'll end up with students or teachers or lecturers without the guidance, and it will start running away. So it's really important, in my view, to have these principles in place now rather than afterwards, when things have become a bit more out of control. So the other thing I think is that principle 9, which is about having the skills and expertise. So this is important too. So making sure you've got training, coming to seminars like these to be able to learn and understand more about AI. So these are just two more examples of the posters that are used within government, which is quite useful. And I'll make sure that you have the links to these following the seminar. And as Faizul has indicated, there is a seminar, a huge summit coming up, which is going to position the UK as hosting a conference on AI safety. And really, this is where the government is, I think, spearheading this area. So it's recognizing the exciting parts of things, but also it's calling for information submissions from participants at that seminar on how can we create good safety frameworks? How can we build on what we've got? How can we make sure that we're using the right resources? Who can we draw upon to help make this really robust? So I would be really unsurprised if we see in the next 6 to 12 months a new kind of framework for AI that's meant to be used more broadly across different sectors. I see this coming together in a way that's quite exciting. So keep an eye on the AI Safety Summit that's happening in San Francisco this November, and then early next year there's another big AI seminar in Paris as well. So then wanted to talk more positively about the benefits that I am seeing at the moment in education and in the work that I do. So I'm an education lawyer. I work in the whole sector of different types and areas of law, including special educational needs, higher education, discrimination law, and so on. The first thing I think that is really exciting, certainly from a accessibility, disability rights perspective, is how AI is being used and can be used to personalize learning, to create assistive technologies for people or children and young people, students, or those who may need additional support to access learning. So, for example, in terms of personalized learning, AI can adapt learning materials to meet individual needs. So some of you will know well about the word differentiation. So you can imagine that it could be used to help better differentiate work for young people with particular disabilities. So for example, it might be able to adjust the complexity or format of the content of a lesson for dyslexia. It might be able to you can integrate use of, say, text-to-speech features or adaptive reading technologies. This is all AI. Assistive technology. This is also a form as well of AI. You can imagine how it could help the predictive text aspects that we're seeing in on word processing on your phone, prompting the next word that you might need to use. You can see that too may help make education more accessible, perhaps for young people or adults with physical disabilities, for example. Those who may have visual or hearing impairments, real-time translation and subtitles in lectures for students with hearing impairments. And this sort of thing, I would hope, would encourage inclusivity in classrooms and in lecture theatres. But another angle that I find particularly interesting is the amount of tools that you can gain simply just from ChatGPT, but from more broader AI models like Claude, and there's another very emotionally intelligent AI model. Claude is a very emotionally intelligent AI model, which some neurodivergent students I've been speaking to have found particularly helpful. And this can help with task initiation. So where if you, for example, have ADHD or autism, or you're feeling quite low and tired or whatever, you can say, I've got all this stuff to do and I don't know what to do. I can't plan my day. It can then give you a plan without a hesitation instantly that you can tweak and make work helpfully for your day. You might not know where to start with a particular piece of research. Again, you could ask for prompts, ideas. How do I start this? I don't know what to do. And it can really help with that task initiation. So it's very useful, in my view, for people with executive functioning difficulties, who might get panicked or overwhelmed by things. It can help you in terms of remembering stuff, help you remain focused. I've seen it used in a very exciting way for disabled and neurodivergent people. In terms of innovation, I've seen examples of some teachers using AI-based platforms to tailor the national curriculum content to individual learning needs. There's some systems I was looking at. Century Tech is used in the UK, but there's already technology that's being used to help personalised learning, that's helping children who may be accessing a home education or an education otherwise in a school curriculum, and having those adaptive learning programs. These are using AI at the moment. AI enhanced research is happening, so many universities are going to be research intensive. So universities are going to benefit from AI in terms of data analysis, pattern recognition across different spheres that they might be investigating, simulations. It is already fostering cutting edge research and innovation in universities. And something else that was interesting, I was learning about how some universities that are doing, for example, natural science-based or lab-based work, so or field work, for example. So lab work, field work, that sort of thing can actually be sometimes very expensive or logistically difficult. So I'm thinking of particular universities, say medicine, engineering, environmental science, or you may have a disabled student, for example, who's less able to, at that moment, or someone who's simply unable at the moment due to being unwell, to participate in lab work. Well, I've seen the use of virtual labs and simulations. So you can have AI-driven virtual reality tools that can enable students to participate in simulated experiments or field work in a way that can allow for some very interesting kind of practical work to be done that's enhanced by AI. It doesn't replace it, but it certainly could enhance it. And I think all of these things leading to the next point will increase or can increase engagement. So it may help, for example, I know that Open University has been using kind of a virtual assistants to help with the interactive learning side of the Open University model. So for some of you who don't know, this is a much more of a self-taught type university approach, but actually this is now giving you kind of more interactive approach to learning, which is going to help things to become more engaging. And also the helpful thing about a chatbot or a virtual assistant is that that's going to be available at any time of the day, unlike perhaps teaching staff or lecturers. So it gives that kind of support 24 hours a day. It may also help you to have personalised feedback. So one way in which the Times Education Supplement is encouraging schools to talk to young people about using AI is to suggest not to get the ChatGPT, the language model, to create the essay, but asking the ChatGPT to review it, to give feedback or pointers on how to improve it. And that sort of thing may be able to give instant feedback, help students to improve, help them to stay motivated, help them to focus on areas where they may need more help. So I think that could be particularly interesting. There's certainly some pitfalls to that. I'll come to that next time. But certainly I've seen it increase some engagement in people in school. Productivity, well, again, some downsides to this, but AI is already automating the marking of exams, coursework, assessments, saving teachers and lecturers, university lecturers significant time. I've heard that Pearson at Excel is trialing some of this now. We know about the areas that this has happened with in the past, with the Ofqual case that I was involved in now 4 years ago, but it could increase efficiency. So as long as there is a human at the start, middle and end of that process, it may be that that's going to help in terms of productivity. I've also, not just in education, but in other sectors, seen the schools, scene setting, sorry, use it for things like managing attendance, timetable management. There was an example that I read about where a school district in the US was struggling to work out how to get all of its school buses to different schools on time. And they kept getting stuck in traffic, and they could not work it out as town planners and transport planners. They put the whole of that system into an AI planner, and it produced a perfect working timetable for all of those buses. And now all those children get to school on time, apparently. That's pretty cool. So this sort of thing is reducing that administrative burden. It's sort of unclogging some of those difficulties that we might be seeing when you just need another pair of eyes or another perspective on things to help unclog something that might be you know, you're so confused or by the complexity of something that it's often difficult to see the wood for the trees. I've seen it also used in terms of analytics. So we can imagine how on, say, a broader level, the AI might be used to monitor student progress or engagement. So where, for example, you might be looking at, as a governor, so this is an important part of governor's role in a school, is to scrutinise the sorts of patterns that you might be seeing with exclusions, with you know, the number of different children that you might be having who might need ESC plans or support for their special educational needs. If you can use AI analytics to track, say, performance trends, or to see if there's any kind of increase in particular needs in a particular area, then you can adapt your methods to suit the needs of those particular students. So we work in education in systems like SIMS, so School Information Management System is already starting to use this sort of data analysis tools in its work. We may see it with other behaviour management tools too. That has to be used. Properly. It might also look at things like at-risk students. So some of those children who tend to fall below the radar, if actually we can find out they are late every day by just 30 seconds, but every day something is happening there. You start seeing the lingering low-level stuff. In fact, it's happening every single day. It might not be enough to trigger off attendance policies, but it's enough to recognise a pattern of something that doesn't quite add up. And I think that sort of thing is quite helpful. It goes back to what Faizul was talking about Ofsted, what Ofsted's looking at in terms of inclusivity in education, and making sure you are keeping an eye on the vulnerable students in the school population. And then finally, of course, you know, curriculum enhancement is going to be a key part of that. Cost efficiency. So when I give that example of the bus problem, I mean, that saved eventually the school borough money. You can imagine, and again, I totally understand the worry about job loss, but you can imagine that it may reduce the need for extensive administrative staff, cutting costs for schools and universities. We know that some universities are at risk of bankruptcy, and they have huge admin teams. If you were able to start to automate some of the admin tasks that could be done, that may well help some universities from becoming bankrupt. So I think that's pretty interesting too. And also a lot of these AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, etc., they are free for the most part. So you can pay for a subscription to add more to get the best model, latest model available, and be able to use it without limit. But ChatGPT at the moment is free, and that sort of thing I think is very helpful, because we can then have affordable AI for people. But also, if you think about reducing reliance on physical textbooks and offering more digital alternatives, that again might help make access to education more affordable for people. So I think AI's integration into UK schools and universities offers tremendous benefits. Improves accessibility, innovation, student engagement, productivity, cost efficiency, and can help institutions meet education standards. There are risks. I have no doubt that there will be many risks that many people will be thinking about. but there's certainly many positives. There's a book on the right-hand side of the screen called AI for Students, which is a new book was produced, I found in my research, by Josh Thorpe, that is to help young people use and students to use AI in a way that can be very helpful to them. It looks like a really, really good and interesting resource for students, and will, I think, become part of creating a AI literacy curriculum in many schools, if not being part of it already. So we're just approaching the end of the seminar. We've got time for questions, but I'm just going to signpost the next seminar, the final seminar. As I've said, there are these risks and challenges with AI, and there are gaps at the moment in the kind of regulatory and legal framework. And I touched on those in the first seminar. And these are just some of the things that I'll be looking at with Mr. Professor Craig Smith, who's a lecturer in law at the University of Salford in Manchester. And I'm going to be looking at a number of different things. So the impact on particular sectors, the risks of things like disinformation and hallucinations. I also want to look quite carefully at how we've got risks that are arising in terms of safeguarding children, safeguarding women and girls in particular. I want to look at job displacement that some people are worried about, robots creating case law, and also I want to look at interesting how we might see the pitfalls of AI being used in education. So, for example, AI being used to generate EHCPs. That could be quite an efficient process, but you can imagine what a mess that might also create. We might see entirely AI-run degrees. We might see automated marking missing unfairly given the service to students. We might see reliance on robot therapists. And then I also want to talk about the potential for technological singularity as well. We have got our next seminar on the 19th of November, where I've got my expert in AI from Salford University coming to talk alongside me. But yes, I think we can draw that to a close now. But thank you so much. And I hope you all have wonderful days and start to integrate AI into your daily life. Thank you.